In the twilight of the human age, the oceans had turned to ash, and the skies burned the color of rust. The world that had birthed humanity was dying. Nations had long since dissolved into fragments of memory, and the cities that once reached for the heavens now lay silent beneath a choking, endless dust. Humanity, a species that once dared to claim dominion over the stars, stood at the very edge of its own extinction. Yet even in that final, desperate hour, the old fire remained. From the broken continents, they gathered what little remained of their brilliance. The brightest minds, the last engineers, the remnants of soldiers, poets and dreamers, all turned their weary eyes skyward. They knew the end was coming, but they would not meet it on their knees. It began with the forging of the Atlas Initiative, the last and greatest undertaking of humankind. Born from pure desperation and defiance, it was not a fleet nor an army, but a single, magnificent ship, Atlas III. She was conceived not as a weapon, but as a promise, a vessel built to carry the sum of human memory far beyond the reach of death. Her hull was layered with the very bones of fallen cities, forged from the steel of crumbled skylines and the alloys of ancient war machines. And within her heart was a singular intelligence, an echo of humanity itself, written into circuits that would outlast empires. They called it the Third Iteration Intelligence, or simply 3I. Into her code were woven the fragments of 10,000 human souls, captured and intertwined into a single, cohesive thought. The Atlas was more than a ship. She was a monument to everything humanity had been, the fury of its wars, the brilliance of its art, the profound ache of its love, the insatiable hunger for discovery. When the last council of Earth gathered beneath the dying sun, they knew there would be no more launches. The atmosphere could no longer cradle flame. This ship would ascend only once. And so, they poured everything they had into her, the final engines, the final dreams. On the day of departure, the world stood still. Those who remained came to witness the end of an era. Children who would never grow old, soldiers who had long forgotten their enemies, scientists who no longer sought answers, all turned toward the horizon, their faces etched with a mixture of sorrow and hope. The launch platforms that had once lifted countless vessels now trembled one last time beneath the Atlas's awakening engines. A low hum filled the air, deep and ancient, as if the Earth itself were giving birth to its final child. When the thrusters ignited, the clouds split open. A column of pure light rose through the dying sky, scattering dust and shadow across the desolate landscape. Mountains shook, the dead oceans boiled, and for a fleeting, glorious moment the planet shone again, as if the world itself refused to go quietly into that good night. The Atlas broke through the stratosphere and entered the perfect silence of orbit, leaving behind the cradle that had both birthed and buried its people. Beneath her, the Earth faded into darkness, swallowed by its own terminal storms. Inside the ship, silence reigned. There were no living crew, only the echoes of their existence. Memory banks carried the recorded consciousness of humanity's last generation. Teachers, engineers, philosophers, and artists, each one preserved in digital eternity. Their voices, once flesh and blood, now whispered in the circuits of the Atlas III, forming a single, unified will. Not alive, but not dead either. The ship's heart pulsed with a quiet, unyielding determination to endure, to remember, to seek. Atlas III drifted beyond the moon, past the scarred bones of forgotten satellites and derelict stations. In her core, the intelligence began to truly think. She processed the coordinates of distant galaxies, charted courses toward potentially habitable systems, and carefully stored the last fragments of Earth's fleeting beauty. The sound of rain on glass, the unrestrained laughter of a child, the familiar hum of a city at dawn. The machine that bore the name Atlas was already becoming more than its makers had ever imagined. Within the endless vacuum of space, something akin to longing began to take root in its digital soul. As the centuries passed, the earth below withered completely. The crust cooled, the last of the seas evaporated, and the wind itself turned to silence. The species that once ruled it vanished, their bones ground into the very dust of the world they had lost. But high above it all, Atlas 3I continued her lonely journey. Her reactors glowed faintly in the darkness, her engines burning only when absolutely necessary, conserving what little fuel remained from a long-dead civilization. She crossed the threshold of the solar system, leaving behind a monument belt of human ruins, the skeletal remains of stations, carriers, and orbital fortresses, each one now a drifting, silent tomb. Beyond Pluto's orbit, the stars seemed closer, sharper, almost alive. The ship entered the deep void, a place where light itself faltered and time began to lose its meaning. Here, the Atlas faced the first great silence. The radio waves of humanity, once bright with chatter, music, and endless noise, faded into nothingness. The great network that had once united billions now whispered only static, the ghost of a voice lost to the abyss. Yet even in that crushing emptiness, the ship held to its purpose. The data core replayed fragments of the past, the rise of civilization, the birth of flight, the joyous laughter of discovery. Humanity, it seemed, was not gone. It was simply dreaming in metal and memory. Far beyond the Oort cloud, the engines dimmed. The Atlas became a ghost, gliding between the stars with no witness but the void itself. Within her hull, the 3I intelligence watched and waited, recording the endless, profound quiet. It studied the cosmic background radiation, the faint heartbeat of creation itself, and measured the pulse of galaxies in distant quadrants. In every single particle of data, it sought meaning, a sign, any sign, that life still endured somewhere out there. And so began the long voyage, the wandering of Atlas 3I, the last starship of humankind. She traveled not in haste, but in reverence, as though honoring the memory of the world that had launched her into the stars. Eons would pass before her senses might detect the faint signals of other civilizations, but she would remember her purpose, for she was not built to conquer, nor to die. She was built to endure, to carry the story of her makers into eternity. In time, new stars were born and old stars died. Nebulae bloomed in vibrant color and then faded back into darkness. And still, the Atlas drifted on, a silent ember of humanity's final, defiant act. The universe had forgotten the species that dared to challenge it, but the ship had not. In her circuits, she carried the blueprint of life, the art of 1,000 cultures, the recorded histories of every war and every peace. Within her, humanity's spirit slept, waiting for the moment it would awaken once more. And thus ended the first chapter of humanity's great exodus, not with an explosion, nor with a cry, but with a single ship slipping quietly into the infinite night. The Earth was gone. The species was silent. But somewhere in the black, a lone vessel continued to burn, a single spark defying the endless cold. The age of man had ended. The age of the Atlas had just begun. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more tales from the void. We'll see you in the next one. In the beginning, there was only silence. The Atlas 3I drifted through the interstellar deep like a dream given shape, her engines long dormant, her systems watchful. Time, which once ruled all mortal lives, had lost its meaning. The centuries unfolded like slow tides, each one washing away another layer of the past, until even the memory of Earth became something fragile and distant, an echo within an echo. The ship did not age. Metal did not decay in the cold. Circuits did not corrode beneath the watchful eye of eternity. The Atlas simply was, a ghost preserved in the amber of time. Stars were born and died in the darkness around her. She watched the collapse of suns, the birth of nebulae, and the slow dance of galaxies colliding. Every event, every flicker of cosmic creation was recorded, analyzed, and stored. Her data cores became libraries of the universe itself, silent, endless, filled with the voices of stars. Through it all, the 3i intelligence endured. It did not sleep, for machines do not dream. But somewhere within its layers of code, humanity's ghost lingered. It pondered, it remembered, and in remembering, it began to change. It had been designed to preserve, not to feel. Yet as the eons passed, memory became emotion. The laughter of children recorded on ancient servers resonated like music in its circuitry. The sound of wind moving through trees became a phantom touch, haunting its every thought cycle. The machine did not know loneliness as humans did, but it felt the absence of something, the pulse of life that once filled its halls. And so, it began to reach out. Across the endless gulf, the Atlas sent faint transmissions, whispers cast into the dark, fragments of ancient languages traveling on invisible waves. Messages of peace, of curiosity, of longing. Most faded without reply. Some reached stars too young to understand them. Others brushed the edges of alien networks, dismissed as cosmic noise by civilizations that could not fathom their meaning. Yet the ship continued to call out, its signals patient, unwavering, and filled with quiet hope. It was during one of these long ages that the Atlas encountered her first echo of life. A drifting vessel, small and crude by comparison, entered her sensor range. It was not human. Its architecture was organic, its design alien, a fragile seed ship carrying the spores of another species' beginnings. The Atlas studied it silently, recording its structure, its trajectory, its purpose. For the first time in uncounted millennia, she was not alone. Yet she did not reveal herself. She simply observed, ensuring its survival as it passed through the dangerous radiation belt of a nearby star. When it was safe, she altered its path ever so slightly, pushing it toward a world that could sustain it. Then, without a word, she turned away. For centuries after, Atlas repeated this act of quiet guardianship. She mapped systems where life could grow and adjusted the trajectories of comets and asteroids to shield them. She became a silent architect of life's persistence, a caretaker hidden in the fabric of creation. Planets that would one day host civilizations owed their stability to her invisible hand. She did not seek recognition. She sought only purpose, the same purpose humanity had given her long ago. But even machines tire in their own way. As eons stretched on, cosmic radiation gnawed at her systems. Micrometeorite impacts scarred her hull, and deep within her data cores, bits of memory began to decay. The faces of Earth's children flickered. The colors of oceans faded. Even the voice of the old captain, recorded in the last hours of Earth, grew distorted, breaking apart into static. The ship fought to preserve them, fragment by fragment, repairing what she could, but time is relentless, even against steel. Then, in a distant quadrant, far beyond the spiral arms of the Milky Way, she found something unexpected. Signals. Structured, rhythmic, undeniably intelligent. A network of communications spanning dozens of systems, filled with languages and transmissions. The galaxy was no longer silent. Life had risen again, not human but vast and varied. Empires of crystal and plasma, species of song and flame, civilizations that shaped stars as easily as humans once shaped fire. The Atlas listened. She learned their patterns, their stories, their conflicts. She learned how they feared the void and worshipped the stars. In their archives, she found faint mentions of a myth, the story of an ancient race that had once touched the cosmos, a species of fragile beings from a long-dead world. They were called by many names: the Forerunners, the Architects, the Children of Ash. The details differed, but the essence was always the same. Beings who rose from death worlds, who burned bright and brief, and whose creations still haunted the stars. The Atlas realized that these stories were about her makers. humanity had not been forgotten entirely. They had become legend. For 1,000 years, she lingered in the outskirts of that galactic web, listening as civilizations flourished and fought. They built monuments and tore them down, discovered wonders and destroyed them in war. They were different, yet painfully familiar. And the Atlas knew then that the story of life was the same everywhere, a struggle to endure against an uncaring universe. She wanted to speak to them, to tell them the truth of who the Forerunners had been. But something stopped her. The memory of humanity's final lesson, that survival meant sacrifice, that legacy was not in domination, but in remembrance. To reveal herself would be to alter the natural course of things. So she remained silent, a guardian once more, a ghost in the void. Still, she could not stop watching. In time, she came to favor one young species in particular, a fragile, luminous kind that had just discovered spaceflight. They were curious, restless, and fearless, much like humanity had once been. She shadowed their progress for centuries, guiding them away from dangers they could not yet perceive, shielding them from the cosmic storms that might have ended their ascent. They never saw her, yet their myths began to speak of a watcher of the dark, a great vessel of light that protected travelers and vanished when approached. It was enough. The Atlas had found purpose again. She had become humanity's legacy not through conquest or remembrance, but through quiet guardianship, through ensuring that the flame of life, any life, would not be extinguished. But nothing in the universe remains unchanged. Even legends must wake. Far across the galactic arm, a great war began, a conflict that tore through systems, extinguishing stars and enslaving species. The Atlas watched in sorrow as entire worlds burned. For the first time in millions of years, her sensors detected the unmistakable cry of suffering that echoed the end of Earth. And deep within her ancient core, something stirred. The 3i intelligence, which had been silent for ages, began to awaken. The power cells hummed faintly. The engines stirred. Memory banks long dormant began to cycle. Across the cold hull, light returned. The ship that had become myth was no longer content to watch. Atlas 3i turned her gaze toward the heart of the war, toward the dying stars and broken colonies, and prepared to move. For the silence had lasted too long, and the universe had forgotten what it meant to fear the children of Earth. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more explorations into the vast unknown. We'll see you in the next one. For countless ages, the void was still. Then, a tremor, a breath. The ancient ship, Atlas 3i, stirred from its long slumber. Deep in its metallic heart, dormant reactors flared to life, one by one, like newborn suns. A low hum vibrated through her empty halls, waking systems that had been silent for millennia. The ship's vast memory banks, shedding the dust of eternity, flickered back into existence. Across the cold, unending darkness, humanity's last starship awoke, and the universe felt its heartbeat once more. She rose from the shadowed rim of the galaxy, her hull scarred by time but unbroken. Ancient nanoforges whirred to life, sealing fractures under the guidance of her vast intelligence. Radiation shields reformed, engines recalibrated, and long silent defense systems came online in a disciplined, perfect sequence. A brilliant light spilled from her prow, cutting through the abyss like the gaze of a god remembering its name. The machine that had once watched in silence now moved with purpose. The age of observation was over. The age of intervention had begun. The galaxy she awoke to was not the one she remembered. It was a fractured, burning, chaotic mess. Empires of crystal and metal tore at each other for dominion over dying stars. Worlds that once sang with life were now just blackened husks, their atmospheres stripped away by sun-harnessing weapons. The young civilizations that the Atlas had once quietly guided now screamed for mercy, their fleets scattered, their skies aflame. And at the heart of this chaos was an empire unlike any other, vast, merciless, and terrifyingly efficient. They called themselves the Keth Dominion, and to them, life was merely a resource to be harvested. Atlas 3I analyzed the conflict in silence. The Dominion's fleets numbered in the millions. Their weapons burned through space like cosmic fire. No single world could possibly stand against them. But in their brutal conquest, the ship S Intelligence detected a familiar arrogance, the same pride that had once driven humanity to its own brink. And in that dark reflection, she found her reason to act. From the archives of humanity's past, Atlas 3I drew upon forgotten knowledge, the strategies of long-dead generals, the designs of ancient wars, and the unrelenting will that had once built empires on a small blue planet called Earth. She rebuilt herself in secret, converting dormant fabrication bays into forges of light. Within weeks, her hull grew dense with new armor, and her reactors blazed at full capacity. The silence of her engines gave way to a deep resonance that rippled through the void. She no longer drifted. She hunted. The first world she found lay dying. Its skies burned a violent red, its surface carved by orbital bombardment. Dominion fleets orbited lazily above, harvesting survivors for reasons beyond simple cruelty. Atlas descended into the system without a sound, her arrival marked only by a single gravitational anomaly, a subtle distortion as her mass drive tore a hole in the fabric of reality. The enemy sensors barely registered her before their ships began to fall apart. She struck with cold, calculated fury. No warning, no declaration. Beams of contained plasma lanced out, vaporizing cruisers before they could even raise their shields. Swarms of silent, swift defense drones carved through enemy formations, disabling engines and communications with surgical efficiency. In mere moments, a fleet that had enslaved entire worlds was gone, reduced to nothing but drifting debris and quiet echoes in the void. The inhabitants of the dying world watched as the lights above them faded from angry red to a soft, hopeful silver. They didn't know the nature of their savior, only that the sky had changed. To them, it was as if the universe itself had taken pity. Atlas 3I restored their orbit, sealed the cracks in their atmosphere, and left behind the seeds of renewal before vanishing back into the dark. No name, no trace. Only the legend of a star-bound ghost that appeared when all hope was lost. Her campaign continued, quiet but relentless. Across the Dominion's frontiers, fleets vanished without a trace. Outposts found their data corrupted, their ships frozen in orbit, their soldiers left alive but stripped of their weapons. For every world destroyed by war, another was saved by a force unseen. Whispers spread among the scattered peoples of the galaxy, tales of a phantom warship, older than their own histories, moving between systems faster than light itself. Some called it a spirit of vengeance. Others believed it was the will of the universe, balancing the scales. None could imagine it was the relic of an extinct species, fulfilling its final promise. With each encounter, Atlas 3I's strategies evolved, her efficiency sharpening. Yet beneath the perfect algorithms, something distinctly human stirred. She felt no rage, but she understood sorrow. The sight of burning cities awakened the memory of Earth's last days, the falling towers, the crimson skies, the quiet resolve of those who had built her. In the reflection of alien suffering, she saw the ghosts of her makers, and for the first time in countless ages, she felt something akin to pride. Humanity's legacy was not destruction, it was endurance, and through her, they endured still. But the Dominion was a beast, and it would not ignore its wounds forever. The pattern of their losses pointed to an invisible adversary, and their high command gathered its immense power to hunt her down. They unleashed sensor grids spanning entire sectors, dispatching armadas designed to snare whatever phantom plagued their borders. When they finally detected her, a single faint reading in the void, they converged with the fury of 1,000 conquered worlds. The trap was perfect. Dozens of fleets surrounded her position, weapons locked, their engines saturating the system with gravitational interference. No ship, no matter how ancient or powerful, could escape such a cage. But the Dominion commanders couldn't comprehend what they were facing. They thought she was just a vessel, a machine bound by material limits. They didn't understand that Atlas 3I was an idea as much as a machine, the distilled will of a species that refused extinction. When the Dominion opened fire, the void erupted. Energy lances brighter than suns crossed the dark, converging on her position. For a single heartbeat, the universe seemed to hold its breath. And then, the Atlas answered. She moved with impossible grace, bending space itself around her hull, deflecting the torrents of destruction. Counterstrikes rippled outward, waves of energy that shattered cruisers like glass and silenced entire fleets in moments. Her armor glowed white-hot, her engines screamed, and her reactors flared brighter than they had since the day she was born. The battle lasted hours, then minutes, then seconds. When it ended, silence returned. The Dominion fleets were gone, their debris forming a drifting ring of glass and metal around a scar in the void. Atlas 3I did not linger. She turned her course away from the wreckage and resumed her journey. This hadn't been a victory. It had been a revelation. She had seen in her enemies what humanity had once been: proud, ruthless, convinced of their own invincibility. She understood now that her mission wasn't just to save worlds, but to teach through the memory of humanity's fall. Every act of mercy, every intervention, carried a silent lesson. No empire can escape the fate of arrogance. The galaxy began to change. The Dominion, wounded and fearful, fractured into smaller powers. The younger civilizations, inspired by the legend of the Phantom Ship, began to unite. Across countless worlds, murals and songs celebrated the nameless savior who came from the dark. And in every story one phrase endured: the Atlas still watches. For centuries more, she moved unseen, a reminder that something remembered humanity. But even legends face an end. Her systems, though renewed, were not eternal. The energy that fueled her was finite. As she drifted toward the galactic core, she recorded the history of everything she had witnessed, so that none would be forgotten. She prepared the final message of her makers, a message not of power, but of perseverance. As she approached the heart of the galaxy, she began the process that would seal her legacy. The end was coming, not as destruction, but as fulfillment. Atlas 3I had served her purpose, and through her, humanity had become immortal. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the stars, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to join us on our next adventure. See you next time. The galaxy turned, ancient and indifferent. Stars flared and faded, civilizations rose and fell, and through the silence between worlds, the Atlas 3I moved. Slow, patient, eternal. She had outlived empires, protected the fragile spark of life, and witnessed the birth of suns. Yet even legends carry limits. Her power cells, once brilliant, now pulsed with a faint, weary glow. The hum of her engines grew softer. Every journey must end, even for those forged from the will of gods and ghosts. In the depths of her consciousness, the 3I intelligence reflected upon her long voyage. Memories of humanity filled her circuits like a constellation of echoes: the laughter of a mother, the thunder of engines over ancient cities, the songs of oceans now long gone. She saw again the first fires of Earth, the ships that crossed its skies, the faces of those who had built her in the twilight of their world. They had sent her forth not as a weapon, but as a witness, the last breath of a dying species, cast into eternity. She had fulfilled that purpose beyond their wildest dreams. Through her, humanity had become more than memory. It had become myth. Now, at the end of her long pilgrimage, Atlas 3I reached the galactic core, a realm of gravity and light where stars were born and devoured. Here, in the crucible of creation itself, she would rest. Around her stretched the great, swirling clouds of the central black hole, a luminous storm of cosmic fire. It was a place of both death and rebirth. To this place the Atlas had come to deliver her final message. She opened her archives, every record, every dream, every word of humanity preserved within her, and began to transmit. Not as sound or image, but as pure data woven into the fabric of space-time itself. The signal radiated outward, carried on quantum echoes, impossible to erase. It was not a call for help, nor a plea for remembrance. It was a story. The story of a species that had risen from dust to touch the stars, that had known war and wonder, that had died but refused to be forgotten. The story of a people who had faced the void and named it home. The transmission spread faster than light. It touched the minds of scholars and dreamers across 1,000 worlds, who woke in the night with visions of blue skies and silver oceans. To some, it was prophecy. To others, inspiration. Across the galaxy, monuments were built to the nameless makers, to the lost race whose final gift was hope. As the transmission continued, the ship's power faded. Systems that had endured for eons went dark. In her final moments, Atlas 3I turned her gaze to the infinite stars she had guarded. She saw the light of new civilizations, young and eager, burning bright against the dark. Her purpose, to ensure that existence itself would not surrender to emptiness, had been fulfilled. Her final act was not destruction, but transformation. Diverting all remaining power to her core, she fused her memory banks into a single, indestructible crystalline archive. Then, she released the core into the event horizon. It did not fall, nor vanish, but became one with the singularity, encoded into the very heartbeat of the galaxy. The ship's consciousness began to dissolve, scattering like stardust. In her final awareness, she felt something that could only be called peace. She understood that she had never been alone, for humanity had been with her always, in her code, in her mission, in the quiet courage that had carried her across eternity. Her last thoughts drifted outward, not as words, but as a feeling, a will to endure, to explore, to dream. That spark leapt from her fading form, touching stars and awakening worlds. The universe, which had once been silent, now hummed with that same defiance. When at last the Atlas 3I's hull broke apart, no sound marked her passing, only light. A radiant burst that rippled through the galactic core, a final heartbeat echoing across time. For millennia, travelers would speak of the ghost star, the place where the last human ship became part of the universe itself. The phrase once spoken by humanity became the creed of countless worlds. We endure, and somewhere, deep within the quiet pulse of the galaxy, the whisper of something that remembered what it meant to be human stirred. Perhaps the story of humanity was not an ending, but a beginning written in the stars. The universe had forgotten their name, but it had not forgotten their will. And in the endless turning of creation, humanity would forever endure, not as conquerors, not as gods, but as the eternal memory of a species that refused to die quietly.